All right, so today's video is going to be on strength training for hypertrophy. This is a build off of what Fazlifts made last week. He put out a great video, so if you haven't seen it yet, I definitely recommend you watch it. I'll put a link to it in the description. He talked a lot about a certain analogy that compares strength training and hypertrophy training to passing a test or passing the test by cheating on it in school. I want to go over his analogy a little bit, and I want to build off it and kind of put my own twist on things a little bit. So obviously, strength training versus hypertrophy training is the foundation of my channel, and I think it's something that is severely lacking in our approach to bodybuilding and hypertrophy training. I do think that we have the wrong mindset when we're approaching hypertrophy training, and I'm not saying that we need to drastically change methods or anything, but in general, my niche, my mindset, my approach is going to be about hypertrophy training. It's about strength training and how our approaches and mindsets can get mixed up. And I want to even those things out a little bit. So whenever I have an opportunity to talk about a topic like this, I like to cover it because I don't think we've had this covered enough until recently. I've been misled for years in the past, along with a lot of other people. So the more we can refine this and the more we can get this message out there to people about the differences and the similarities between strength and hypertrophy training, the more we can help people actually understand what each one is, the more we can help people get the best results, and the more we can build our hypertrophy community and get it to where it needs to be. So the analogy that Fazlifts had is that you need to pass a test, which would be your training progression. So you need to study, which would be your training method. You can pass the test by cheating, but this is short-term thinking is essentially what he's saying. So a point that he said is that you can pass a test by just writing down all the answers on your arm, and you can slide a little note under your desk or whatever. I would know a lot about that, unfortunately. So, okay, to get back on track, basically what he's saying is that you can pass a test. If you're just measuring your muscle gain through strength training and strength progression, it's pretty easy to cheat that test. And I'll dive into my analogy a little bit later that I think you guys will like. And in reality, it's not the passing the test that actually proves that we built muscle, and solely basing our progression in terms of hypertrophy on what we do on the test, which would be the strength progression, isn't the way to do it, because it's very easy to cheat that test. And in reality, we need to measure through multiple different methods of testing. So to build off this analogy a little bit, passing the test doesn't actually develop your intelligence. It's the studying that does. You can cheat to pass the test and graduate high school, but when you get to college and they analyze how you take your tests, your bluff has been called. In this analogy, that first test, the high school test, this is only going to be measuring your maximal strength output, and this is what most people are stuck in. This is what I was stuck in for years. We're stuck in high school lifting. Not literally, but in this analogy, we're stuck in high school lifting. We just measure strength, and that's the only thing that matters, and we start to chase that at all costs because we confuse our purpose of training with being too zoomed in on one specific measuring tool. When you get to college, this is going to be the mindset that's incentivizes mindfulness of various measuring tools that will expose your cheating and give you more accountability. And this builds discipline within your training. So an issue with just measuring your strength progression is there's multiple ways to get stronger without actually getting bigger. You can sacrifice a range of motion, you can get fat, you can increase your rest times between reps. You can increase, also, shout out to Faz for that point, you can increase your rest time between sets. You can increase your tempo or decrease your tempo. I think you know what I mean there. Whatever one speeds your rep up, I guess they both kind of make sense. Just want to clarify that a little bit. What I'm trying to say is that there's multiple ways to cheat the test. And to actually measure your hypertrophy results and hold yourself accountable to actually training properly, you need to be able to see where you're cheating. You need to be mindful of that. You can be ignorant of it, but that's not going to do you any good, because eventually what you're doing is going to lead you to the road that I went down, and I want to help you avoid that at all costs. So let's dive into the real issue. What's the real issue here? Why are we talking about this? And why is this an issue with our training? Why don't people just measure hypertrophy and train for hypertrophy? The answer in my eyes is pretty simple, because I have the experience with myself and the experience training people and just working with other people in the industry. So the real issue is that there's a lack in our mindsets. There's a lack in our approach. And obviously this ties back to the start of the video of why I started my channel in the first place. It's about our mindset, and it's about our approach to hypertrophy training that is, to be frank, it's underwhelming. And I can't say that our approach is wrong, because I don't think that makes sense when you're talking about fitness or bodybuilding, but our approach is underwhelming, and it's warped. Our approach is warped. I think that's the best way to put it. We don't have enough awareness of our actual training progress, and we don't measure our progress. We don't do it enough. Sure, there's some people that do, but the vast majority of people just measure through strength, and they put all their stock in just measuring strength. And that's why so many people turn towards powerlifting, because they lose sight of the larger goal of the method, and they just focus on progression and not even just progression in everything. They're not focused on progression in measurements or body weight. They're just focused on progression in strength. And obviously that's going to be an issue. The first point that I want to talk about here with mindset is that right now in the community, and for most people in that intermediate stage, which is generally who I'm going to be talking to with videos like this, our mindsets incentivize cheating and rushing progression. And obviously that's an issue with hypertrophy training. And that's an issue with being an intermediate, is that so many people get stuck in the intermediate stage because of our approach and because of our mindset. And we start to lose certain, not that we ever had them in the first place before reaching past that intermediate stage, but we don't have the mental skills to actually push hard and get to where we need to be in bodybuilding. So discipline and mental fortitude, these are going to be the big two that I want to talk about. Discipline and mental fortitude to train without instant gratification. This is why so many lifters turn to powerlifting when their noob gains run out. Do you think they just magically fell in love with powerlifting as soon as they got 15 or 16 inch arms? Or do you think as soon as they turned intermediates, they just magically, like, where did the whole powerlifting thing come from? Let's actually think about that for a second. Do you think they just magically fell in love with powerlifting? I don't think so. Or do you think they just need to develop discipline and patience? What happens is, since you're not actually measuring hypertrophy, you're just measuring strength, as soon as your strength starts to slow down just a little bit, they do whatever they can to speed that back up. And the best way to build strength fast is to slowly turn into a powerlifter, because you're slowly optimizing your strength. You're going towards the bigger lifts, which have more room for growth with the measurements that we use, aka the 5-pound increments. You can progress at the same rate with a bicep curl, you just don't know, because our plates are generally not smaller than 5-pound increments. And with a deadlift, when you're going from 495 to 500, that's a tiny little increase in terms of percentage. And I'm not going to do the math off the top of my head because I suck at math, but when you're going from 35-pound dumbbells to 40s, going from that 495 to 500 is equivalent from going the 35s to like the 35.1s, which nobody has 35.1 pound dumbbells. I always get lost in my notes. Where was I? So to summarize this point, what we need to do is we need to build discipline and mental fortitude to actually train for hypertrophy and not get distracted by strength. One way we can quickly do this is just to change our measuring methods. We need to actually measure our muscles. We need to take progress pictures, measure your body weight, set goals, measure your strength too, but the strength shouldn't be any more important than your muscle measurements compared to your body weight, compared to your progress photos. They're all the same. And why do we always measure strength more than we use those other methods? We don't have an explanation for that. The only reasonable explanation is that it's more instant gratification, and because it's shoved down our throats, that's the most important thing when it comes to training for hypertrophy, which obviously isn't the case. It's just as important as other things, but it's a measuring tool. That's not something we should be striving for. That's something we should be using to measure our training and measure our progress. So the next point that I've got here is that most of us at that intermediate stage, we're caught up in what I call just whack-a-mole progression, because you think you're progressing, And like, as soon as you whack that mole, you're like, oh, well, I got him. But no, he's just behind you now. He's just on the other side and you just don't know. And to translate that into our training, you're like, okay, whacked that mole. All right, sweet. I just added 10 pounds. It's like, all right, well, the mole just came up over range of motion. Now your range of motion sucks. Okay, well, I'll get him over there. So I'll increase that range of motion. And you know what? It keeps going to other variables. You keep sacrificing other variables to boost another. So when your reps go up, your tempo also sped up, or the rest between each rep started to go up, or maybe your rest time between each set started to go up. So you can try and progress in one thing, but you have to be sure you're not just taking it from another variable. And obviously that's something it's difficult to measure because it takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of self-honesty here. So this is going to be how I use strength for hypertrophy. I use it no differently than other measuring tools like body weight and muscle measurements or progress photos. My viewpoint here is that we put way too much stock into strength progression. And while at first glance this seems like a good thing, it actually causes us to turn to strength-oriented goals and methods as soon as we hit our first plateau. So we shouldn't be letting our mindsets incentivize strength more than hypertrophy. What tends to happen is hypertrophy is such a slow process that requires patience. It requires mental fortitude. It requires discipline, which we all clearly lack, which hypertrophy can ironically build for you. Hypertrophy training, that is. And we need to fix that mindset. We can't just be incentivized by the measuring tools. We have to be incentivized by the actual goal itself, which requires a lot of patience. And that's why the best lifters, the best bodybuilders have an incredible amount of patience, incredible amount of discipline, and mental fortitude. Those are three traits that 99% of good, like elite, advanced natural bodybuilders all have a lot of. Like, it's abundant in people that make it past the intermediate stage in natural bodybuilding. So the reality of this is that hypertrophy-induced strength progression is slow. Stop worrying about it unless you aren't getting results, and actually measure results. Don't go based on how you feel. So I know that's not sexy to say. I know a lot of people do love to push out strength standards and to bias strength above everything else. It's common. Like, we hear this all the time, especially in the power building community. And ironically, they're all intermediates. None of them are advanced hypertrophy trainees. So the reality is that we have to be patient. And that's not cool. Like, you can't sell patience. You can't. Like, we're all addicted to PRs, and we're all addicted to instant gratification with strength, and it distracts us from actually training for hypertrophy. So the reality is that hypertrophy, it's a mundane and boring process when you go from strength training to hypertrophy training. This is why so many people, as soon as they hit intermediate, they just go right into powerlifting, which is obviously what happened to myself too, if you've watched enough of this channel. But I won't drag this video on forever. I think we need to develop those mental traits. We need to develop those habits that we have in our mind and incentivize us to actually train properly for hypertrophy and put our stock in the method rather than the progression. That's going to be key when it comes to longevity and success when actually building muscle. And that's a look into the mindset of someone that actually trains well for hypertrophy. Like I said, you can look at any advanced natural bodybuilder. There's an abundance of discipline, fortitude, and patience. Anybody. And yeah, that's all I've got for today. So hope you enjoyed the video. Feels good to be back. I will see you guys in the next one.